And today I will be presenting and teaching you about the political status of communities from Herbert's book, Citizens, Cops, and Power, Recognizing the Limits of Community. So there are three main concepts which I will be covering today, and those include the four aspects of political lightness of communities, community representation, who speaks for a community and what characteristics do they have, and cultural capital and what that is. So one of the main concepts when learning about the political status of communities is the idea of the four aspects of political lightness, which consist of individualism, heterogeneity, transience, and fear. So what are bureaucratic hurdles? They are the four aspects of political lightness, and they act as high and complex hurdles that only allow for certain citizens of a community to be able to overcome them. And most of the time, those citizens that are able to overcome them are ones that have an economical advantage. So here's a quote from Herbert that explains in his words what these hurdles are. The bureaucratic hurdles placed before communal groups are high and complex, and only certain citizens possess the ability to surmount them. So the first aspect of political lightness is individualism. Individualism in a community is the idea to create a community of individualists. So it's like everyone for themselves kind of idea. In communities, an individual will put themselves and their family first to avoid any unwanted business that does not relate to them. So, the struggle of time and economic position and how that affects individualism. Is community meetings, like say a community meeting wanted to be put into place, it would take too much time for individuals to attend because they want to focus on themselves and not their community. Individuals who are in an economic position of comfort could easily attend one of these meetings, as they typically only work 9 to 5 jobs, and these meetings would be timed to their desires. However, they prefer to do things of their own interest, such as gardening, running, and other recreational activities. So, how would that affect individuals who work 2 to 3 jobs just to stay economically stable? Well, these individuals will not even get the chance to attend these meetings, even if they wanted to, solely due to time strain. And they need to focus on their economic position before their community. Because individuals of economic comfort do not want to attend these meetings, and those of economic disadvantage cannot just due to the time strain, it creates a loss of community. And ultimately, individualism will take over a community and exclude those who are disadvantaged. So, what exactly is heterogeneity, as we will talk about next? Well, it is when there is diversity in something. So, for what we are talking about is the diversity in communities and what complications that can bring. There are typically many different demographics across a community, which cause it to be uneven and make it so that it aligns with the economic class of power, which causes uneven political organizing of communities. There is an overall fear for individuals of other cultures to get themselves involved in group activities because they fear disprobation. So one of the main problems for others to interact with the community is their linguistic and cultural differences. This is mostly because community activities are conducted in English, and for a lot of people in the community, it would be hard for them to fully understand and partake in these activities because of the language barrier. There's also a lack of cultural diversity, as most community activities are only conducted by European Caucasians. And this is a problem for diversity, as most cultural groups find more comfort when other individuals from their own culture are also involved. And say someone of a certain culture was to get involved in these activities, if they accidentally did something bad, even just like bringing up a bad idea at a community meeting, it could cause their whole culture to be targeted, and is why many individuals of other cultures are scared to partake in these community activities. Overall, linguistic and cultural group differences cause the inability for political capability, and is only one culture is having a say, while others are left out due to the barriers that they are scared of. Next, I'll talk about transience. Um, so, what is that? That means to only last for a short time, and in this case, that being homeowners versus renters of communities. So first, I will talk about homeowners. They are seen as interactable and part of the community. They're looked upon as cohesive and reliable to a community because of their longevity. And they are able to have a political stand in a community because they have the time to make meaningful connections with other homeowners. As for renters, they're seen as too transient and culturally and politically unreliable due to their short time in the community. Most renters don't want to put time and money into a place where they might only be staying a few months because it's not going to benefit them in the long run. And renters have no chance to make political stands in communities because they're politically unequal. Most of the time, they can't even make a minimal degree of a connection with other residents of the community because of the short amount of time that they'll be living there. The last political lightness I will talk about is fear and what it means to keep to yourself. So, fear of retribution. If someone complains too much about something to another neighbor, they fear retribution against themselves because, well, you're supposed to only stay in your own problems and not others, apparently. So, the recognition of danger and keeping yourself safe. Individuals may recognize criminal acts, but they turn a blind eye to them because it's not their problem. They don't want to get caught up in the shady acts, risking their own safety. So, overall, fear just makes the community feel unsafe. No one cares about the safety of others, so no one goes outside because they feel too unsafe, and that can create bad social relations between the individuals of the community. Overall, fear impedes on the ability to have political gatherings in communities and causes individualism. Next, I will discuss who actually represents a community and how that can affect the view of that community. So, who speaks for a community? Well, it's typically people that have a voice and are well educated. And this causes for a very narrow range of individuals that can actually speak for a community. And that makes the views of a community obscuring and have a false reality because it only shows what the so called leaders believe, not the community as a whole, because the leadership lacks diversity. So, what characteristics do speakers or leaders have? The main speakers of communities will typically be Caucasian, well educated, middle/upper class, and an owner of property. They believe they need to make all the calls for a community to function and move forward, and they also believe that you must have ties with multiple people in the community. But in order to make ties with people in the community, you must be able to communicate. And as I talked about earlier, linguistic barriers make this harder for some individuals who don't speak English. And as a reason, leadership in communities is predominantly Caucasian or English speaking citizens. So, lastly, I will talk about cultural capital and what that is. So, here's a quote defining it. Cultural capital is the accumulation of knowledge, behaviors, and skills that a person can tap into to demonstrate one's cultural competence and social status. This is a term coined by French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu in 1973, and here's a picture of him. And there are three different types of cultural capital, which consist of embodied, institutionalized, and objectified. First, I'll talk about embodied cultural capital. And so it is the knowledge which people gain over time, primarily from educational and social interaction. An example of this is community representatives. Well, they have educational degrees and they interact with one another. So it allows for them to get a better social status from their gained knowledge they learned at school, while others without degrees are left out to diminish their social status because they can't be part of community meetings. Institutionalized cultural capital is the ways in which people are measured, ranked, and certified through achievements. So, having an educational degree, a solid job, and ownership of a house shows are just some examples to show people what you have accomplished and how it has raised you economically to be able to gain political status in a community. Lastly, I'll talk about objectified cultural capital. This is when a person's economic class is determined by the materialistic things they own. An example of this is homeowners versus renters, which we looked at earlier when going over transients in communities. Homeowners show higher economic class because they own the property, whereas renters would be considered lower in economic class is because they only live on that property temporarily. So I like to leave you guys with some questions to think about. Feel free to put your answers in the form where I post this. So here are the questions. 1. Can you think of any other examples of cultural capital in forms of embodied, institutionalized, and objectified cultural capital, and how those examples might relate to Herbert's book? You can specifically, I prefer you relate it to chapter 2. However, you feel free to relate it to any chapter that you are presenting on. And second, what are some ways you think community representation could be changed to become more culturally diverse? That's all. Thank you for listening, and here is my works cited.